Breakfast with the Bible. Something to munch on. Welcome to episode 12 of Breakfast with the Bible, a podcast where we work our way through the Bible one bite at a time. My name is Dan, and today we are studying John 2, 6 through 12, which reads, Now there were 6 water pots of stone set there after the Jews' way of purifying, containing 2 or 3 metrites apiece. Jesus said to them, Fill the water pots with water. So they filled them up to the brim. He said to them, Now draw some out, and take it to the ruler of the feast. So they took it. When the ruler of the feast tasted the water now become wine, and didn't know where it came from, but the servants who had drawn the water knew, the ruler of the feast called the bridegroom and said to him, Everyone serves the good wine first, and when the guests have drunk freely, then that which is worse. You have kept the good wine until now. This beginning of his signs Jesus did in Cana of Galilee, and revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him. After this, he went down to Capernaum, he and his mother, his brothers, and his disciples, and they stayed there a few days. Here are my notes from John 2, 6 through 12. First, I had a question mark for verse 6. What is a metrite, or metrite? Not even sure how to pronounce that one. How much is that? Why did this translation use that word? I had never heard of that word before, reading this in the WEB translation of the Bible. The ESV says 20 or 30 gallons, so that would be like 120 to 180 gallons of wine in all of these pots. When I Googled the word metrite or metrite, I found it was an ancient Greek unit of liquid measurement of about 39.3 liters or 10.38 gallons. So, whereas most translations were used to just convert the amount and give it to us in our known modern units, the WEB uses the word that would have been used in the original language this book was written in, which is pretty cool. I had a light bulb in verse 6. 120 to 180 gallons is a lot of wine. I'm not sure how large the party was, but I'm guessing they did not run out of wine a second time after Jesus made all that wine. I didn't read any commentaries or study Bible notes on this, but I'm guessing that we can take from this that Jesus blesses lavishly. He goes above and beyond, so that there would have been no doubt in anyone's mind that now they had a sufficient amount of wine for the people to continue celebrating the marriage of this couple at this wedding feast. That makes me think of the times Jesus feeds thousands of people. Afterwards, there are always basketfuls of fish and bread, whereas at the start they had like 5 loaves and a couple fish. Jesus never makes the exact amount needed, but richly blesses people. That seems like a good takeaway from thinking on why Jesus would have made so much wine. To love abundantly. Next, I had an arrow in verses 6 and 10. It's the same arrow from 2 different places, and it's just that as Jesus blesses lavishly, we should follow his example and do likewise. In our pursuit of obeying Scripture, which Jesus summed up by sharing the greatest commands to love God and love others, Matthew 22, 37 through 40, we should love others in an extravagant, overflowing way. I also listed verse 10 here because in it we see the wine Jesus made was good. In this way, he also showed them great love by providing a rich, excellent gift for them to enjoy. Maybe another way to say it would be, Jesus loves and blesses with extravagance. Next, I had a light bulb in verse 7. One thing that stood out to me while reading this passage was that Jesus had them fill these jars with water first and then turned the water into wine. Like, he could have just said, "Show me where you have some empty containers," and then just made them full of wine right off the bat. Instead, he asks people to fill them with water, and then he turns the existing water into wine. I thought of how God often chooses to work through us humans, though we are sinners. What an amazing blessing it is to be used by God for his purposes, though he doesn't need us. Think of how cool it would be to see that Jesus turned water into wine. Think of how much more powerful still it would have been to fill those stone pots with water, to then see that it became really good wine. I love slowing down and putting myself into the story like that. This water into wine miracle also makes me think of the way God worked a miracle through Moses, turning water into blood as a curse upon the land of Egypt in the book of Exodus. I don't have anything to add to that, and I'm not saying there is significance there, but it is something that came to mind while thinking on this passage. Next, I have a light bulb in verse 8. The faith of those carrying out Jesus' commands reminds me of Mary's faith in the last passage, when she said, "Whatever he says to you, do it," in verse 5. They filled the pots to the brim with water, in verse 7. And now in verse 8, they take supposed water to the ruler of the feast. They must have seen as they were drawing it out that it was no longer water, but it really stood out to me that it just says, "So they took it," after Jesus tells them to draw some out and take it to the ruler of the feast. Then again, I don't know when it became wine. Was it after they drew it out and it became wine once it was in the containers they were drinking from? The cups? We don't know. But either way, the people obeyed Jesus. All right, I have a question mark in verse 8. Who is the ruler of the feast? What role is that in a feast? Why did Jesus not simply tell them to start serving it to the guests? Other translations use terms like master of the feast, master of ceremonies, master of the banquet, governor of the feast, and head waiter. Clearly, it was the person in charge of the feast. I wonder why Jesus told them to bring it to this person first. Maybe to show immediately his power and authority? This person's job is to make sure everything is going well, so he would have been focused on the quality of everything and how things were going. He notices right away, this stuff is good. All right, next I have a light bulb in verse 8. Even though Jesus may have told them to bring his wine to the ruler of the feast, he isn't going around telling people of his miracle. We see in this verse that the author, John, points out that the guy did not know where the wine came from, but the servants who had drawn the water knew. Again, that makes me think of how amazing this miracle would have been as it unfolded to those who drew the water that had now become great wine. Next, I have a light bulb in verses 9 and 10. Just as Jesus provided what I'm guessing was an ample amount of wine for the wedding guests, he also made excellent wine. And so we've already touched on this, but here it stands out to me in these verses. He lavishes love upon the people he blesses with his miracle. I don't know about you, but I would love to taste that wine. It must have been amazing. It was like nothing else, because the God-man, Jesus, transformed water into it. I've never thought about this, but that is pretty crazy to think about. These people were drinking miraculous wine, just like the Israelites got to eat miraculous sweetbread that fell from heaven in the desert when they ate the manna. Exodus 16:31, the house of Israel called its name manna, and it was like coriander seed, white, and its taste was like wafers with honey. My next one is also a light bulb in verses 9 and 10. I don't think I'm reading too much into this, but it stood out to me that this is a little foretaste of how Jesus does things much differently than everyone is expecting. This ruler of the feast drinks Jesus' wine and notices something surprising about it right away. It stands out to him so much that he feels the need to go and talk to the bridegroom. He says in verse 10, "Everyone serves the good wine first, and when the guests have drunk freely, then that which is worse. You have kept the good wine until now." That is not how things were done. Clearly, you serve the best wine first, and then when that expensive good stuff is gone, you start pouring the cheaper stuff. We will see as we continue reading the Gospel of John that with Jesus, things get turned on their head. Expectations are not met because Jesus has a different way of doing things. It reminds me of Isaiah 55, 8 through 9. "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, and your ways are not my ways, says Yahweh. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts." People have been waiting for the promised Messiah to come and set them free. However, they're expecting someone to set them free from political oppression. They don't understand that the work Jesus will do to set us free from sin will come not from marching on a nation in power with an army, but from Jesus laying his life down in humility to take the place of all the sinners he loves. Jesus conquers Satan, sin, and death by choosing to lay his life down and sacrifice himself. If you just stop and think about how God accomplished his purposes to save people through Jesus from a human point of view, it's pretty crazy. It is not something I think any of us would have ever come up with, but that's because we lack the thoughts and ways of God which are so much higher than our own. He is the creator and we are his creation. When we try to understand his ways through our created minds, or in comparison with all we know of, which is all his creation, we utterly fail because he is holy. He is set apart. There is none like him. And wouldn't you rather serve a God like that than one who is easily understood and common? Okay, I have a light bulb in verse 11. Here we see John confirm that this is the first of Jesus' signs. Other translations use the word miracle instead of sign and speak of it being the first of his signs rather than using the phrase beginning of. What stood out to me, though, was the result of this miracle of Jesus. It revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him. We've talked about glory and what that word refers to in episode 4, if you want to dig into that more. But I'll read the verse again from that episode. This is John writing of Jesus, John 1:14. "The Word became flesh and lived among us. We saw his glory, such glory as of the one and only Son of the Father, full of grace and truth." It speaks of his uniqueness, maybe his heavenness, if I can make up a word, his identity being one of the persons of the Holy Trinity. Then it says in John 2:11 that this beginning of Jesus' signs revealed his glory and his disciples believed. We have already seen how some of the disciples have said things to show they believed Jesus to be the Messiah. But this miracle has the effect of them believing in him anew, in a fresher, more profound way, perhaps. They believed in him, but seeing Jesus perform this miracle gave them more faith in him. They saw his glory, his greatness, divine character, and true nature, and they believed. Like, this miracle pointed to the reality of Jesus being the chosen Son of God. There was something else I came across in various commentary notes that I didn't notice myself while studying this passage. It's that the text points out that Jesus' disciples believed in him, like specifically his disciples. It doesn't say all those present at the wedding believed. Many of them probably never even knew what Jesus had done or that divine miracle wine had graced their lips. In this way, I now move on to my arrow for verse 11. Just as the disciples saw the glory of Jesus revealed in his miracles, we can too, as we read about the life of Jesus in the Bible and see him at work in the lives of believers. From this glory of Jesus being revealed to us, we also move to belief in him, just like the disciples. I like how the author John ties these together. It not only speaks of a purpose of Jesus' miracles, to show people who he really is and reveal his glory, it also has the effect that his miracles' authentifying revelation brings people to believe in him. Jesus claimed to be one with God. Just think about the word revealed in verse 11. Jesus did something supernatural, and this sign revealed his glory. It showed something that was not known, displaying the truth once hidden. It makes me think of the phrase, peeled back the curtain. It comes from that old novel and movie, The Wizard of Oz. The companions finally make it to the great Wizard of Oz, only to have it revealed to them that he is no wizard, but a simple man hiding behind a curtain, controlling an illusion that made him appear to be supernatural and powerful. In Jesus' case, it's just the opposite. In performing the sign of turning water into wine, Jesus pulls back the curtain, which lets people in on the truth, that he has glory as of the one and only Son of the Father. John 1:14. Jesus was fully man, but he was also fully God. He was the divine God-man. Man, I love this. I've never gotten this much out of this passage. This is great. I hope this podcast is at least as much of a blessing to you as it is to me studying for and writing it. And my last one is a light bulb in verse 12. This light bulb is simple, but it's good to pay attention to the small things. This again records for us a moving on to a new place and a passage of time. It reads, "After this, he went down to Capernaum, he and his mother, his brothers, and his disciples, and they stayed there a few days." John 2:12. When you look at this passage in different translations, you see they all break up the text differently here. I even thought I was going to have verse 11 be the last one for this episode, but I chose to include verse 12 in this one because it felt like it ends this passage before we move on to verse 13. Also, I just like to try to put myself into the passage for a moment. What a sweet time this must have been. Jesus getting to spend time with his family and his disciples at the wedding, and then for a few days afterward. Imagining being there makes me excited to read on and continue with them. This concludes my notes from John 2, 6 through 12. I invite you now to reflect on this passage, what we've studied, and pray about it as I play this brief song. Okay, that's going to do it for episode 12. Before listening to episode 13, read John 2, 13 through 17, looking for notes using the Swedish method. I'd love to see your notes and thoughts on this episode or the passage we studied in the comments section of the website, or on YouTube. You can find the home online for this podcast at breakfastwiththebible.com. There you're going to find links to buy some pretty awesome merch and ways to support the show. You can click on the coffee cup to buy me a coffee, which offers a one-time donation or monthly support options, and those include bonus content. Also, please drop a review of the show in your favorite podcatcher. This really helps others find the show, and I would really appreciate it. And if you're watching on YouTube, tell me what you thought in the comments, like, and subscribe. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time when we'll be studying John 2:13 through 17.
Music by Dan Absalonson.